Hey guys, trading on several major bank stocks has been halted today after the sudden collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, and it sent shockwaves through the market. I know that I was scared all weekend. I was terrified, actually. Like, what direction is this going to go in? I don't think we really even know right now. And even though I think there are a lot of lawmakers out there trying to ease everybody's concerns, there's been, of course, another government bailout. That's the way I see it. On this small bank, I think that there's worry that not only are our lawmakers lying to us, but that we can't really trust these financial institutions that we have our money in, especially ones that are not FDIC insured. And I mean, even then, think about it. Remember what happened in 2008? And then we had to have, under Obama, then we had that bailout happen then. What is really going on here? And by the way, as a mom and somebody who goes to the grocery store, just like you, I do the same thing. I go to the grocery store. I'm watching prices skyrocketing and especially on certain products at the grocery store. And I'm worried about what I'm seeing globally. I've got, all you have to do is turn on the news to feel a little bit terrified of what is going to happen, right? You got skyrocketing prices at the grocery store. We spent all those years in COVID wondering and I remember when COVID first started, and the only reason I'm going to bring this up is because it goes to show you how there are these events that happen. And in national security, we call them black swan events, right? Something happens that you don't expect and everything changes. The whole gamut, everything that you imagined it would be now becomes something else. And that's a black swan event. COVID was one of those. And I'm going to use that as an example because I remember right at the very beginning of COVID, when they were talking about, 2 weeks to stem the flow and then we're going to be back to normal. I was thinking to myself, no, 2 weeks, no way. It's not going to be back to normal in 2 weeks. And anybody who believes that is just fooling themselves. And then it was like 2 years. And not only that, it was 2 years where the government under emergency acts kind of seized control of our freedom. People couldn't go to church. People couldn't do what they normally did. All of a sudden we had masks on our faces. Even those of us who were questioning, why are we doing this? It's not really working. I had friends in the medical industry and friends who are nurses and doctors and physicians assistants. And they were saying, wow, these masks, these cloth masks really aren't doing anything. But if you said that, all of a sudden you were ostracized. These are the things that I worry about. I worry about when we see something like this, the Silicon Valley Bank, and this strange kind of all of a sudden shift in how our country is handling this. And the fact that we're bailing out once again, and the concern over the weekend where what are we going to do? And the Fed scrambling to find some type of solution. I'm afraid that we're just at the beginning of something much bigger. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Just, in layman's terms, I get it. I feel you because I'm there with you, and my family is there with your family. I have Patrick Byrne. He is the former CEO of Overstock.com. And I'm going to have a multiple part series with him. He is incredible. He's a great friend of mine. And he's going to be coming on this show to talk to you about this. He is an expert in finance and he's a realist. And he's going to tell you exactly what he feels and what he believes is happening in our world right now, both financially and very much on a very different cultural and I would say political as well as ideological, right, perspective. He's going to give you what he thinks is happening right now. And I'm so grateful that I can bring him to the show because he is overseas. He is very far away. And we'll be talking about that when he gets back to this show. And I'm able to bring it to you because of great, great sponsors like Fast Growing Trees. Fast Growing Trees. I love this. I'm out in my yard. I'm constantly out there. It's a form of therapy for me. I love to plant. I love to grow vegetables in my garden, and I love trees. And I believe in breathing some life into your own backyard with Fast Growing Trees. And you can do that with fastgrowingtrees.com for this spring. And the interesting thing is, here you have it all in one, right? It's like having your own personal gardener. You can go online, fastgrowingtrees.com, and you can figure out like, okay, this is the area of the country that I live in. These are the kind of plants that I want to grow. And they will do it all for you. You don't have to run down to any of these gardening centers or anything. You could go to fastgrowingtrees.com, fastgrowingtrees.com, and they will help you find the right plants for your climate and for your garden, and they'll deliver it right to your front door. They give you expert advice and reliable shipping. Guys, join over 1.5 million happy Fast Growing Trees customers. You can do that right now. Go to fastgrowingtrees.com/Carter. That's CARTER now to get 15% off your entire order. Get 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com/Carter, fastgrowingtrees.com/Carter. So the cost of living, guys, is just going through the roof. And nobody in Washington seems to really understand this. We have this $1 trillion budget, right? We are spending money left and right. The Chinese and Japanese actually own the majority of our debt. Terrifying that China owns the majority of US debt. That is an adversary of ours. I talk about it on the show all the time. It's incomprehensible to me that you would like allow the keys of the kingdom to rest with your adversary, right? But that's what we've done. And while we're all busy just trying to keep our jobs and trying to keep up with our kids and trying to keep up with our family life, there are these folks in Washington that we put into office. We expect them to do their work. We expect them to defend the Constitution. We expect them to put us first, and they don't. They put themselves first. For the majority of them, they put themselves first, not us, not the American people. You and I go to the grocery store, and I don't know if you experience this, but I do. And I get down there and I'm just looking at the prices of groceries just soar. Milk, I can't even believe how much that's gone up. I mean, now I think you're paying for organic milk in some parts of the country. I know in Hawaii, some places it's like $10 because they have to bring it in, $8 to $10 a gallon. Out here, forget it. If you get organic milk, you're paying over $7. And I'm talking about Texas, between $6 to $7 to $8 for organic milk. And then, regular gallons have gone up like about $1, like you're paying for something. But then it's just everything. It's every little thing. So I found this really incredible story, and it talks about the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. It tracks every type of economic metric that you can think of, from exchange rates to crude oil prices. They also use federal data to actually keep tabs on grocery staples like bananas. Okay, my family eats bananas all the time. My daughter, it's like, I swear I should just grow a banana tree in my backyard because the kid loves bananas. Coffee, I do. That's me. I live off of coffee every day. Cereal, anything else. Those are like staples in most homes, right? Fruits, coffee, cereal, vegetables, meat, right? The prices of all those items haven't just crept up over the last year, according to this story on the Hill. They've literally exploded. They've jumped over 11.3% across the board. That's according to the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. So you may be thinking to yourself like, okay, well, maybe the job market looks good, but we've got inflation soaring. And by the way, the job market only, and I'm not an economist here, but I have common sense. The job market only looks good because so many people were without work for years under COVID, and now they're not getting that check every month. So they got to go back to work, right? So people are going back to work. It's not like that it's good. It's just like they're going back. And then we have inflation, staggering inflation. The feds can't slow that down. It just keeps going up and up and up. And now we have these banks, right? That we find out later. It's like, I was listening this morning and I'm just like you. I half of what they say on CNBC, it goes in one ear and out the other. I'm like, how do they do that? How do they know this? So I try to keep it in layman's terms, in simple terms, like just somebody explain to me what's going on. And you have these banks that, take all of our money. They're not FDIC insured, right? Like Silicon Valley Bank. It's not the same. And apparently they invested in like these long drawn out bonds, right? That they're not going to get paid back on for like more than 10 years. And there's your money. Your money's going here. Your money's going there. And by the way, they're super woke. So they're investing a ton of their money in all of these new kind of environmental industries, the woke industries, and it's all experimental. And then all of a sudden, come time to sing to the piper, they don't have the money there. There's no money there. But, interestingly enough, the CEO, he like sold his stock a few weeks ago, huh? That all these guys do that. They put your money in the bank. They promise you the world. They're going to protect you, but they are only protecting themselves. Why? Because it's so interesting that they somehow coincidentally were able to like sell all their stock, right? Before the bank implodes on itself. And then you got the government, trying to rush to the rescue of these banks and of these companies. And all of a sudden you're saying to yourself, well, nobody comes to rescue me. Who comes to rescue me when, you lose a job, you can't make a house payment? I remember, and I'm going to tell you guys a story. It was just so gut wrenching for me. I went through a period where it was just so tough. We had no money. I was trying to pay back bills. This was years ago. And I mean, I literally was completely broke with little kids and wondering how I was even going to get my cell phone back on. That's how desperate I was. I mean, it was just a bad time in my life. And I had some gold bracelets that my mom had left me. I was like, what am I going to do? Who is going to help me out of that? I got to get the phone back on. I had one more bill to pay. And I just had to literally just come to terms with the fact that, and I was working. But there were coincidences, things that happened in my life, not a coincidence. I would say more of like tragedies that happened that I couldn't control at the time, and I sold the bracelets. I sold some of the gold bracelets to a jeweler and took the cash. I was completely ripped off. But I needed that money. I needed to pay my bills. I needed to take care of my children first. And I had to do what I needed to do to move forward. Nobody comes and rescues us. That way nobody bails us out when we don't have any money. We have to sit there and just figure it out for ourselves. But these companies, they just get bailed out left and right. Everybody's friend. And I'm going to bring up something, Michael Yon, you guys know I've had him on this show before. He's a war correspondent. He's a great guy. He's actually right now in Europe. He is in Holland and he's been sending me, I know he's traveling all over the world, much like Patrick Byrne right now, who is going to be leaving shortly. He's in the Persian Gulf and he'll be leaving for India. And I'm going to be talking to him coming up in a few minutes. But Michael Yon, it was really fascinating to me how, he was talking about, look at what's happening in Belgium. Look at what's happening to the Dutch farmers. And it was interesting. And the reason I'm interested in that, I'm going to fill you in on a little bit of it because it goes to show you how things can turn on a dime. Like we're all at home. Remember, like with COVID, we're living our lives, we're living normal. All of a sudden, everything changes. Black swan event on a dime, just like that. Our lives are turned upside down. Our world is upside down, and we don't even know how we got there. And we don't even know what's going on. I am asking you to just be aware that things can change, that things can change so dramatically that we're left kind of scratching our heads. Let me give you Belgium, for example. Right now, Dutch farmers are literally being sacrificed. They are. Right now because of climate change gurus. You don't think that could happen to you, right? You don't think it could happen. Look at what happened during COVID. Look at what happened in Canada when the truck drivers protested in the middle, of Ottawa and then were held in prisons for protesting. Look at what happened here. And by the way, banks were seized, right? Bank accounts were seized. People didn't have, any recourse. It was like all of a sudden you thought you were in a republic. You believed you were in a democracy or a pseudo democracy. And then you have nothing, right? Because all of a sudden the rug is pulled out from under you. Well, right now in Belgium, it's the same thing. Here's what Peter, and I'm going to pronounce Peter's name wrong, but Emanuelson, a Swedish journalist, he wrote on Twitter, he said, the Dutch government has decided to essentially seize 3,000 farms in order to meet new climate goals. They did the same thing in the Soviet Union. My friends, it is happening all across the globe. Governments are seizing power right before our very eyes. Like what we thought was a democratic government, what we thought was normal is not normal. And when I see this happen with the banks, when I see what our government is doing, when I see the prices go up on goods and services, when I see that we're essentially like in an inflationary situation that doesn't seem to be slowing down, when I see what happened under COVID, it scares me. It scares me. And President Biden proposed a $6.8 trillion budget last week. Really? President Biden, how are we supposed to wrap our heads around that? What's going to happen in the next 2 years? I'm scared. I know you are too. Guys, we just got to pay attention to what is happening around us. We've got to pay attention because look, 7% interest rates on homes now. How many people do you think that bought homes thinking maybe interest rates will go down in the next few years, may not have a job or may not be able to afford that mortgage in the next few years? Because 7% is huge. I was grateful that when we moved to Texas, it was still, I got it at 3.2. How lucky am I with my husband? How lucky are we? 3.2. Over 7%. And some people have arms and oh my gosh, I can't even imagine how high that could get. And with rising prices at the grocery stores and the cost of children today, raising them and everything else, we are going to need people we can trust in Washington to call out these ridiculous budgets, 6.8 trillion, to put a stop to this mess. And we better pray that we don't end up in a similar situation like we see our Dutch friends in, right? Or that type of control again, like we saw under COVID. I'm going to talk to Patrick Byrne about that and so much more coming up. But guys, I want to tell you about Donors Trust, another great sponsor of the Sara Carter Show. I mean, I really believe in Donors Trust. This is a place where you can put your money and your money will go. It will literally go to charities that make a difference, charities that you believe in, charities that stand up for your ideals. But guess what? It won't expose you. They can keep your donations private. And we know now what happens in a nation like ours when you have leftists in charge of the IRS and in front of and in front of these agencies. It is frightening. You're like, where do I donate my money? How do I donate my money? Privately. You do it through Donors Trust. You can take control of your charitable strategy. It is donor advised funds. You have philanthropic guidance. And guess what? Legacy protection as well. Whether it's saving unborn babies, empowering entrepreneurs to offer alternatives to failing public schools, whether it's fighting green energy extremists that want to consolidate power, Donors Trust is the charitable giving account provider for you. Let my friends at Donors Trust help minimize your tax liability while maximizing your giving. Visit www.donorstrust.org/Sara. That's www.donorstrust.org/Sara, SARA, no H. Again, that's www.donorstrust.org/SARA. So I spent a little time telling you at the opening of my monologue, that story about me having to sell. I'm sure you've all been through it, me having to sell those gold bracelets or trying to scramble to find money to pay bills, because of job loss, because of personal tragedies in your life. I know that so many other people have experienced that. And I wasn't telling you that to, obviously, not to feel bad for me. It's just to say that I get it. I understand where you're coming from. And I understand that nothing is secure, that you may be feeling secure one minute and then have the rug pulled out from under you the next. That's pretty much how life is. I mean, for all of us. My friend Patrick Byrne, he has been through so much. I mean, from being the CEO of, Overstock.com to having to face the challenges in his own life of amazingly overcoming cancer multiple times, but also overcoming being targeted by the government and standing up for what he believes in and being a true patriot, not being afraid to say, hey, wait a minute, let's talk about this. Let me tell you what is going on. Because as much as he is a CEO, and I'm telling you, books will be written about him if they're not already being written. Patrick is just such a fascinating human being, just somebody who I trust, somebody who is intelligent and who can view the world differently. He can look outside of the box. And I just feel like his advice is advice that I take, and I want to share that with you because he's my friend. And especially now that we're seeing ourselves in this financial crisis. And he's also somebody that has overcome extraordinary challenges, real life challenges. It's not just, a silver spoon, right? It's real life challenges. And he stood up against some of the biggest obstacles. And now I'm just grateful to have him here with me right now today from the Persian Gulf. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the Sara Carter Show here on YouTube and Rumble. I love the opportunity to talk to you about these issues you care about, and I appreciate your support. Thank you so much. I'm grateful to have Patrick with me. Patrick, can you hear me?
I hear you beautifully, Sara. I see you beautifully as well.
Patrick Byrne is also a great friend of mine and someone who I respect wholeheartedly. I was telling him before I got on, you're actually on your way to Bangalore, India, right?
That's right.
What are you doing over there? What are you going to be doing over there?
Hiring tech talent. There's some good tech talent over there. A little project I'm working on. I'm in Dubai right now. I've been trying to get it done in Dubai. It looks like I have to go to Bangalore to finish, to get just the type of people I need. That's why.
Oh, okay. This is exactly why, Patrick. I always tell you, but I even told you in such bigger terms that you are the most interesting man in the world. Not that guy with the beard and the mustache on those commercials.
Ladies?
It's actually you.
How about the
yeah,
ladies?
the Dos Equis guy. Exactly. So I want to delve deeper into that. I feel it's very mysterious, your trip to Bangalore. I don't think it's just techie, but we'll leave it at that. We'll leave it at that. I wanted to ask you about something that's happening in the United States on a more serious note. With Silicon Valley Bank. And as we know today, stock market's getting ready to open. It's a little bit down. It was down over 300 points on Friday when the event happened, when it became disclosed that actually Silicon Valley Bank was folding. We haven't seen anything like this since the Great Depression. Talk is that their investments were long, their assets were long, like investments in bonds and such were unrealistic goals. They were investing in companies that were experimental. A lot of it had to do with environmentalism and things like that. And what is really happening here in the United States? Because there's a lot of people that are very concerned that this small bank, that this isn't going to be the end of this, that there's going to be more banks involved in this and more exposure of these smaller banks and their failure to adequately invest money and that they're not even insured the same way the larger banks are, like JP Morgan, Chase, and so forth.
Well, let me give you the bottom line up front, in that is that everybody should have full fuel tanks, 2 weeks of food in your house, 2 weeks. In the early 30s, FDR closed down the banking system for 2 weeks. If this contagion spreads, you could see something. One hopes it wouldn't be for 2 weeks, but you could see something like that. You want to have at least 2 weeks of food and fuel and some walking around money, $500 or whatever, if you can swing it. And if anything, go and get some silver 1 ounce coins. This could be this could very easily be contagious and carry through the system. Now, if it does, there's still things the United States government can do to basically nationalize everything and prop it up. But we are in financially really perilous times.
Can you, in just a nutshell, tell us what went wrong? I know because you understand this, you mentored, and a lot of people probably don't know this, Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett, a genius.
He was more my mentor than I was his mentor.
Well, that's what I was saying. So you mentored under him, right? I mean, so what are you seeing? Can you, in a nutshell, explain for the layman, like what's really going on here? Because I think a lot of folks really do not understand the complexity of this.
Well, let me give you the cover story, the story they want us to believe. And that is a bank has to be very careful to match the duration of its assets. It buys a bunch of bonds and it has a bunch of obligations, and it tries to get those to sort of roughly match. You don't want to lend your money long term, but have depositors who can show up any day and take all their money back. So you always have to have a lot of your deposit as the bank. You have to buy very short-term bonds that you can liquidate easily. Well, something has happened. I won't be too technical, but there's a term you've been hearing, maybe the yield curve is inverted. Normally the yield curve, short-term interest rates have moved up for the government, have moved up substantially. And when interest rates for the short-term bonds, when interest rates go up, the value of the bonds go down. And here's the kicker. If you're a bank or an insurance company and you own $10 billion worth of bonds, and those bonds collapse because the government is doing this, and maybe they're only worth $7 billion, you normally would have to report at the end of the quarter, gee, we lost $3 billion. All these bonds we have in our vault are worth $3 billion less than they were. But if all you have to do, according to the way accounting works, is all you have to do if you're the bank is say, well, we don't really plan on selling those in the market. We're just going to hold those bonds until they mature another year. If you do that, you don't have to report that loss. So the gods of the SEC let you get away with it. But the gods of economics don't care about things like that. They don't care about Mickey Mouse games you play with yourself on your balance sheet like that. In reality, you lost the $3 billion. And because they didn't own up to it, that triggered a chain of events. So that's the story anyway. And that would be a very standard story of explaining why a bank went down. I do worry that that's just that may be the truth, but that there's other things going on underneath it all, and that that's just a cover story. And of course, the proximate cause is probably Senator Elizabeth Warren going out and speaking about it. I haven't looked at the data enough, but there's a real theory going around Wall Street that it actually would not have been in bad trouble had it not been Elizabeth Warren going out and saying this, which is why traditionally politicians are very, very, very careful when they talk about financial companies, because the politician just saying something can make it come true. Elizabeth Warren being an idiot, and these just violated that. I mean, you could go out to any, a well-known politician could go out and raise questions about any financial company, any bank, and the truth is you can create the run which makes it self-fulfilling. Now, I'm not saying there wouldn't have been a problem otherwise. I'm digging into it. I'm trying to get the data to find out whether she caused this or just exacerbated it, but she was part of the problem.
Right. And that would have been that whole essay, that opinion essay in the New York Times, right, that she wrote about talking about blaming lawmakers. It was really hard to gauge whether or not that was her or that was just a set of circumstances that led to her, like you said, and her discussing it caused that that run on the bank. But I guess we'll find out in the upcoming days. I mean, there could be people even this morning, heading, and I've heard this throughout, the media, but I don't know if this is just over exaggeration or not, that people will be heading to their banks and some people will be withdrawing their money from some of the smaller banks and maybe trying to reshuffle that money into other banking systems that they feel are more secure. And that's going to be really hard, I believe, on the housing industry as well in the future, because it's a lot of those smaller banks. And I was even, talking about this earlier, it's a lot of those smaller banks that do a lot of the loans for home loans and such. And I think when seeing the interest rates go up, so we may not be out of this mess yet, not for a long time.
Oh no, this absolutely could ripple through the system as a contagion and wipe out the system. After 2008, they did just the wrong thing. What they should have done is realize, there are these banks that have gotten so big at the center of our financial system, they are just Chernobyls ready to go off. We better do something about that and draw a fence around them and protect the rest of the system, and frankly, let them go under and churn them up and mince meat and do what we did in the S&L crisis when you had all these little town banks go under and they take the banks over and chew them up and create, they separate them into good bad. But what we did and what President Obama did was they drew the circle around the ring around the big banks, he and Geithner. But instead of saying, it's too dangerous for society to have these kind of banks, they said, we declare these as systemically important banks. And because they're so important, we're going to give them all this favorable treatment. And because they give them favorable treatment, that means the market says, they're less risky than a normal bank, which means even though they're really far more risky, they're less risky. And because they're less risky, they get all kinds of advantages. They get to borrow cheaper and such. So the decision to get out of 2008 like we did created this situation where it really favored the big 19 things at the center of the financial system, and it left the community and the regionals very, very vulnerable. They should have done just the opposite. What they're doing now is very much in line with what Geithner did, the exact opposite of the smart move. I happen to have known Geithner in college, and none of this surprises me. And
so you're saying is he's not as smart as he makes himself out to be?
He's an empty suit. Tim Geithner's a guy who got out of college, was recruited by Kissinger, went to Kissinger Associates, and he went around and was like a flunky in the back in the bowels of government. And he's one of these guys. And then one day, if you go back, it was around 2005.
Did you ever party with him, though? Wait a minute, Patrick. You know what I want? I want the interesting stuff. Did you ever party with Geithner in college, like watch him get stupid drunk and say something dumb or anything like that?
No, he was actually my teaching assistant in Chinese, and his Chinese was quite good. And his sister was very attractive.
Smart guy when it comes to Mandarin.
But say again?
I said a smart man when it comes to Mandarin, to learning the dialect.
He spoke it well, but he's really a guy he's the ultimate Somebody said to me once, I think it was Fuad Ajmi, said to me once, Timothy Geithner's every old man's idea of the ideal young man. His father was like a guy who floated around the Ford Foundation. So he just grew up understanding life is sucking up to rich and powerful people. And he's a suckbutt. The British would call him a suckbutt. He's the most quintessential suckbutt I ever met in my life. He's a suckbutt to older, powerful people. And he has been since college.
Hashtag suckbutt.
Yeah.
Just gonna hashtag. We're just gonna make
college. The kid in college who walks around in a suit. He walked around in a suit all the time in college.
So what you're saying is the 2008 TARP, right, was that it was a troubled assets relief program, right? That in and of itself just created more problems than it was ever worth.
Well, yeah, it was not the right way to go about it. It was as it was run, it was actually run reasonably well, but it was the wrong architecture of how to solve the problem. They should have used it. It was just before I knew you, Sarah, but I was in a 3-year fight with Wall Street, 05 to 08, and I had come across a bunch of bad stuff that I tried to expose, and it's pretty much a microcosm of what's going on now. The entire establishment went to silence me and crush me and such. And what they should, but that's when I realized that Washington is really in the pocket that we have an oligarchy. We basically have an oligarchy, and the oligarchy has two wings. One is the Wall Street elite, one is the deep state. And what we should have done in 08, well, I was going around in 05 to 08, I was dealing with politicians who literally would tell me this stuff and basically tell me, help us. We're under the thumb of New York, of Wall Street. What can you do? And they were sort of encouraged me to fight. 08 was their opportunity to cut off that thumb. Instead of cutting off the thumb, they should have ground up the big banks, the Goldman Sachs's and not JP Morgan, but let's stick with Goldman Sachs. They should have ground up the big banks. They should have done what they did with the S&Ls back in 1990. They should have, and we would have been away from all the systemic risk, and we would just have had a lot of good regionals and community banks. They did just the opposite. They made it better and more profitable to be one of the very well-connected big Wall Street banks and gave them a huge advantage over the regional and the small players. It's just the opposite of the approach they should have taken. Now, given that constraint, they used TARP and they handled things reasonably well. At the end of the day, if the U.S. Treasury wants to print trillions of dollars, they can get you through anything. And my guess is that's what they're going to do here, rather than let the spread.
Well, but that's what everybody's saying in Washington. I mean, you hear the news and lawmakers, and I'm going to jump into weaponization because that was a perfect segue. But in Washington, D.C., and I'm listening to the news early this morning, CNBC, Bloomberg, everybody's talking about it. But when they asked Republicans, there was Mike Johnson on the news this morning. He said, well, when you talk to Democratic colleagues, they're just of the assumption of, yeah, there's something wrong, but we can always print more money. We can always print more money. So that's the excuse. We can always print more money. So let's just do whatever we need to do and let the cards fall where they may instead of fixing the problem.
Yeah, that's a great strategy until the day it isn't. And on the day it isn't, it becomes you have a huge problem. What they should do if the government's going to bail out these big banks to keep them from collapsing and harming society, they should treat it just like the bank was going to Warren Buffett and Warren Buffett bailed them out. Warren Buffett would demand options and warrants and this, that, and the other thing. So once the bank got through it, Buffett would own 30%, 40%, 100% of that. That's the kind of thing they should do if the Treasury's going to bail them out. Instead, they bail them out for nothing. They're happy if they get their money back, like TARP. They're happy if they get their money back. What they should own the bank. They'll say, look, we'll protect you. We'll keep you from destroying the other banks through contagion, and we'll keep you guys from going to jail. But in return, you're going to cooperate with us as we, the Treasury, take over, recapitalize, boom, break it into good, strip the bad assets out, auction them off, spin the company out to the public again. But all you guys, all you shareholders, you either lost 100% or you lost 80% or something like that. If the Treasury is going to bail it out, they should do it like a private entity would and said, we want something in return. Instead, they just turn it into a gift for these elite.
Right. Because we would never get that break. We would never get that. I would never get that phone call. That would be like, no, you're okay. Don't worry about it. Let me bail you out.
These guys all have senators on speed dial, have regulators on speed dial. Sam Bankman-Fried was the second biggest donor to the Democrats. Silicon Valley Bank, I understand, has turned out also to have been given splashing money all over the aisles. That goes back to, can I tell a quick John McCain story?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Tell it.
If you remember, you're too young. Around the time you were born, in about 1989, 1990, there was something called the S&L crisis. And 1,000 or 1,500 little small town banks went under. One of them was in Arizona. It was called Lincoln. A guy named Charles Keating ran it, but it wasn't small. It had gotten quite big. It turned out that every time that regulators from the FDIC started sniffing around and saying, hey, this bank's upside down, it's going to go under, it's going to be $1 billion loss. Every time they did that, Charles Keating, the head of the bank, he had 5 senators on speed dial. He would just call them up. And those senators would then call the FDIC in and say, hey, we understand you're harassing a good citizen of the state of Arizona. Those 5 senators, 4 were Democrats, but 1 was John McCain. And they call it the Keating 5. And McCain was one of the Keating 5. So and also the Clintons, they had the same deal going with the bank in Arkansas. It turned out they were classic. Whenever the FDIC started sniffing around this bank that they were part owners in, they had the political connections and in DC to call, and those people would keep the regulators away. And that works until the bank completely Chernobyls. Was that Whitewater? That's the story with Whitewater.
That was exactly it. That was Whitewater. And I had a very good friend who I worked with at the Washington Times, Jerry Sieper, who was a reporter at the Washington Times. He passed away this past year. God rest his soul. It was one funny guy, one great old-fashioned reporter. And the Clintons did not like him at all, Patrick. Let's just put it that way. He was the Whitewater journalist that would go after him 24/7 to try to expose what was going on there.
You and Taibbi are like the 2 journalists. There's a reason I went to the 2 of you with my story.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Well, you got to give Elon Musk a call and say, hey, what happened? You gave it to Taibbi. I'm glad he did. He did a great job with it and exposing the stories.
And did you see him in
he's
Congress?
fantastic.
Did you see him in Congress?
He's fantastic. I hashtagged GOAT squared on both him and Mark, because I think greatest of all time. It was fantastic. Even with Matt Taibbi, and even with Mark and others like Barry Weiss, in the beginning, when I was breaking the stories on, President Trump and what was happening with the FBI and everything, there wasn't a journalist out there that wanted to believe what I was writing. It took forever to get people to actually see. And I was almost afraid myself, Patrick, to see what was actually transpiring before my eyes. I thought, this can't be real. And I'm so grateful, now that other journalists are seeing it. And I think Matt, is getting a taste of it, being right there in Congress where they're charging, congressional members are saying, are calling him out, are calling Matt out and Mark, and saying that, that these aren't even real journalists, so-called journalists. These are people that have won awards, that have written phenomenal pieces, that have sacrificed a lot of their life to get the truth out. Yeah. And I remember having that same kind of heat on me, and just how terrifying it is, in those quiet moments, wondering like, wow, I know everything I'm writing is a fact. Everything is truthful. And yet the enemy is coming after me, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to withstand their fire.
I hear you. I hear you. Matt, if you go back to that scene in Congress where she's calling him a so-called journalist, Matt you remember, is a wonderfully dry guy, and he gives this funny look. Mm-hmm. I think Matt was getting really red-pilled right there. He went into Congress thinking, he has said, like, there was going to be interesting philosophical discussion about the significance of that. He wasn't prepared for the Democrats to just stonewall him and accuse him. He's kind of where you and I were 5 years ago, where he's getting the depths of how corrupt it is. You keep thinking, well,
Right.
I'm just dealing with some corrupt guys, but once I pierce through there, I'll get to the solid people. Well, it's turtles all the way down. When you're talking about the political class.
It is.
Yeah. Within the agencies, don't give up on the agencies. The 3-letter agencies and the military, overwhelmingly people are on our side. They do not want to see a communist Chavista revolution. That's what this is, a Hugo Chavez revolution. They don't want to see that happen. They're confused. They don't know what's happening. They just have bad leadership. And I think
I agree with you on that. There are good people. I agree with you on that, Patrick. And I'm going to do everything I can. And I know you will too. And I know that, yeah, you're right. We're 5 years ahead, and we are going to continue to expose the truth. And I think that's just in our nature, you and I, and as well as Matt and Mark and all these other great journalists that are out there, because there are some really great journalists. And hopefully once we shake the leaves from the tree, we'll get back to where we need to be. That's what I hope. Thank you so much, Patrick, for being a part of the show. I appreciate all the time you've given me, my friend. And I look forward to seeing you when you come back from your journeys overseas.
Thank you so much, Sarah. What a pleasure it's been to be on. Anytime.
Hey, folks, gold and silver allow you to protect what you've worked so hard for and give you back the control and privacy that you need. And because reputation is so important to me, the only company I recommend is Allegiance Gold. And I talked about it earlier in this podcast. You want to be in control of your future. You don't want the government to have that control. And look at what just happened to the banks, right? I mean, I think it's important to have your assets diversified, and particularly with Allegiance Gold. Allegiance Gold is someone that I trust and I'm recommending to you. And right now you can get $5,000 of free silver on a qualifying purchase. When you tell them that Sarah sent you. Get $5,000 of free silver on a qualifying purchase when you tell them Sara sent you. So don't wait. Call or click today. 877-702-7272. That's 877-702-SARA, SARA, or go to protectwithsara.com. We can't control the Biden administration, folks, but we can prepare. That's 877-702-7272. That's 877-702-SARA, SARA, or protectwithsara.com. Folks, I hope you enjoyed the interview today with Patrick Byrne. He is my good friend, and I hope now that he has shared some insight with you into the future and what we can do. And by the way, I agree with him. We should have 2 weeks of, and he has always talked to me about this, about, food and some money and, assets, things that we can hold on to protect ourselves and our families in case something does go sideways. We saw that with COVID, right? Well, anything can happen now. So just protect yourself, protect your family, and protect your nation. This is it. This is what we have. This is our future. And we can only do it if we are doing this together. We're going to cover on our upcoming podcast with Patrick Byrne, corruption, election security, China, and so much more. Stay tuned for that. I'll give you those important dates in our upcoming episodes. I've got Tiffany Smiley coming up. I've got Dan Crenshaw coming up in a future podcast. There's so much that I want to share with you, so much that I want to talk to you about. And I'm going to bring you the best people right here at the Sara Carter Show. We are not afraid to tell the truth. We are not afraid to get out there and expose those corrupt people in Washington, D.C.'s swamp. And we are going to stand up to them together. Why? Because together in numbers, we are more powerful than they are. Don't be afraid to speak the truth. Don't be afraid to stand up. Remember, I'm there with you. Follow me on Truth at Sara Carter Official, on Twitter at Sara Carter DC, and on Instagram at SCarterDC. God bless you. God bless our great nation. And guess what? God bless the great state of Texas.